Hello and welcome to the very first Prinny Bomb podcast. This is where you'll hear all the latest Nipponichi Software America's European online store news. And we'll have a few guests that may have some information of their own to share. For our first episode, we wanted to have a little discussion about 2018 and take a look back at some of the games that were released during that year. So today we're joined by a special guest from NIS America who has traveled all the way over to the UK to join us.
Hello everyone, my name is Alan Costa. I'm a producer at NIS America. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us today, Alan. So to get things started, what is your origin story in gaming and what made you want to make this your profession?
I mean, video games were always, I'm old enough, but not that old, where video games have been around since I was a kid, but not super developed. So I can still remember playing Atari. I can remember playing games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the arcade, X-Men, stuff like that. Going to people's houses and playing Nintendo.
N64?
I was a little older. So what happened is that my folks never let me get a video game system of my own as a kid. And so I was just kind of relegated to either going to a friend's place and playing and things like that, or if I could go to an arcade, I'd play like that. When I turned 13 or 14, my buddy, PlayStation had just come out. Oh wait, so I would have been 11 or 12 actually. PlayStation 1 had just come out in America. And my buddy had just bought, or wanted to buy a PlayStation 1. And so he's like, I'll sell you my Super Nintendo for like $100, he said. Yeah. And my dad didn't want me to get one, but he's like, tell him you'll give him 50 for it. Because he thought my friend was like, hell no, I'm not going to sell you, Super Nintendo for $50. But I said, 50? He's like, sure. So I got it. At that point, I pretty much only played sports games, Madden, things like that. One day I went to the local rental store, and there was a game with a dude with red hair with a sword. Up until that point, most of like the fantasy-based games were Western fantasy, that I saw at least, right? Yeah. So it's like big, burly dudes. And like, I've never been a really big dude. I've put on some pounds over the years, but not in like The Rock way, right? And so here was a guy who was kind of skinny, had this sword. It was like, oh, this is kind of intriguing. And that game was, I don't know if it came out here in Europe, but it was called Lufia 2. And
I've heard of it, but I haven't actually played it myself.
It was a real latter-day JRPG. And long story short, that game introduced me to JRPGs, and that literally changed my life. Because I wanted to know more and more about games like this. And so I rented as many as I could. I got a PlayStation pretty shortly after that. I played Suikoden 1, which I literally rented, and in one sitting I got to the last boss. It's the only time I've ever played a game starting in the afternoon, all through the night, watching the sunrise, and then reading to the end of the game. That's how big of an impact that game had on me. And because all these games said made in Japan, in America, the only thing, we don't really think much about Japan. Again, I'm old enough where Japan to us, my generation, equals kind of like high quality electronics. So you think of like, your Sonys and things like that. Yeah. And so other than that, I didn't know much about the country. Yeah. So I started to read more about Japan, and I decided, I really want to check this place out. My dad's from Hawaii, so, we have, some of my relatives are actually half Japanese because, everybody lives in Hawaii. But I talked to them and they're all like, yeah, Japan's a really cool place. Japanese people are awesome. So I majored in Japanese, lived there for a total of 7 years. And basically it's all because of video games.
You mentioned it earlier, but just in case anyone missed it, what is your role at NIS America and how did you end up joining them?
I am a producer at NIS America, and I actually joined through almost through a tragedy in a way. When the earthquake happened in Japan, I was living there, and my college roommate pinged me because he still lived in America, and he's like, "Hey, dude, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm doing well." And we hadn't talked to each other in years at that point. And he's like, "He's still in Japan?" Obviously, I was. And he said, "I'm going to be out there for work. You want to hang out?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So we went and got a drink. And I said, "So what do you do now?" And he said, at that time, incidentally, I was working in the fishing industry. So totally different from games. And we went out to drink, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I work for NIS America." I was like, "Oh, the guys who made Disgaea," because my buddy in college played Disgaea. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You wouldn't happen to have a job or anything, would you?" Because at that point, for various reasons, I was kind of ready to come home from Japan. Yeah. And he said, "I'll check." So he went, checked. Turns out one of the translators was just finishing up his tenure at the company. He said, "Okay, if you want to interview for a translation position you can. Got the job, started out in the localization department as a translator, and then I moved up to where I am now, producer.
Even though you're based in the US, your role has you traveling through Europe. Have you had a chance to meet fans from each region?
Let's see. I've met fans from the UK because, we do MCM with you guys. I think we've ran into a couple of fans in Germany through Gamescom.
Yeah.
But the other countries, since we don't really participate in events, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to interact with them.
Oh, okay. What was your impression of them when you met them?
Which country?
Do we have UK the best friends?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are you saying that just because we're from the UK?
Yes. No, but honestly speaking, and this is our president was here last year, and I think he got the same question. Particularly fans of our content, I feel, are kind of the same the world over.
Okay.
So to put it, otaku, right? You hear that word.
Yeah.
Which in Japan is obviously, it's probably been said to death, like it's a negative word, negative implication. You don't want to be an otaku. Whereas people, outside of Japan have really embraced it as like, I'm an otaku. And we're all kind of the same no matter what country you're in, whether that be Japan or America or here in the UK. So being the kind of kid that I was so interested in Japan growing up and, since I'm from California, going to Anime Expo as a kid, like a lot of times I can see myself in a lot of these kids that come up. Yeah. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. NIS America has a uniquely diverse mix of products. How do you handle such a large mix as a company? I remember at one point NIS America was doing anime along with gaming.
Well, actually we haven't done anime for several years now. Okay. Kind of that aspect of the business is kind of on the back burner.
Yeah.
But basically we have, really strong upper management, including like Yami-san, guy Mitsu, who you guys spoke to before. And then, you've got kind of your middle management, and then you've got people who are directly working on a lot of different things. And so because we're still relatively small, I think we have 34 people in the company, communication's pretty simple. And because there's fewer people towards the top, and then the people that directly deal with the games through the licensors, we're able to look at all those kind of hands-on. We're able to give that information to people further down the chain. So I think that's what helps us handle such a diverse array of titles.
So now it's time to get into our discussion for the day. We're going to take a look back at some of the games we released last year, and it seemed like there were quite a few, but we're going to start with the longest 5 minutes. Who are ShoePro DX, and how did this partnership with NIS start?
They are a small indie studio who worked on, I believe, some mobile games before we contracted them to do longest 5 minutes. And I think Mr. Nikawa really liked their work and stuff.
Yeah.
And so he reached out to them, and they made longest 5 minutes for us.
Okay.
In collaboration with us, I should say.
Yeah. The longest 5 minutes is ultra rare in Europe, but now people have a chance to play it on Vita as well with the newly announced physical edition. People seem really excited about the Vita version. What is it about that system that gives it so much staying power?
That's a really good question. I feel like with anything, and this isn't limited to video games, and this is also just one man's opinion, so take it as you will. Anytime there's something that turns out to be really niche, from games or from music, there's always this cool sense of belonging when you're in the know about it, right? And so since the Vita, unfortunately, because I'm actually a pretty big fan of the system, since it never turned out to be quite the success that probably Sony was hoping, I think the people who did invest into it really felt like they were in an exclusive club. And, looking back at the history of this thing, I don't know that at any point you could actually call it a success. And sorry, Sony, but that's just how it is. That said, the system got some incredible titles over its life cycle. Some of those reports, stuff we did like Dangan, some of those are original titles with, like Freedom Wars, the Uncharted Golden Abyss was incredible. A bunch of other really cool visual novels. Just so many things found their way on that system. And then in terms of being an indie machine too, it's really, and that's more for a company like Limited Run Games over in America. I don't know if you guys get their games out here, but them also taking stuff and turning out physical versions of it has just made the fan base, I think, feel really appreciative and really feel like they're super cool because they have one of these things, and they know.
Next, we're going to talk about the Suda 51 game, the 25th Ward. NIS America released other Suda 51 games on console and on Steam. This fits a theme in NISA's release schedule where you take a group of games from a creator and promote them with the developer as the figurehead, probably more so than the NIS America brand. What benefit do you get from this approach, and could we see more collabs with Suda 51 in the future?
It's a fantastic question. I think the benefit that we get is credibility.
Okay.
And what that means is that the further and further away you get from the people who actually were in the room planning the game and developing it and working on it, the less and less credibility you have talking to people outside. And so when we are able to bring in people like Suda 51 or Mr. Kondo for Falcom, or even our own Mr. Nikawa, we're able to put into contact with fans or with press, depending on the venue, the actual creator of the game. And so it's not like, don't take my word for it. This guy made the game. Ask him. And so I think that's the biggest benefit that we get. And on the other side too, I think, and this is kind of a more businessy answer, but there's also a flip side, is that we also like to show the creators that we're really invested in promoting their games as best we can. And honestly speaking, a lot of times it's not easy for these folks. A lot of times they're high positions in the company. It's like, can they really spare a week, or sometimes a week and a half to come out here? But it goes to show them too that it's like, no, we want you to be able to meet your fans in these foreign countries. We want you to be able to, no one can talk about your game better than you. And so to give them that venue and that platform, as it were, to talk about it, kind of has that dual effect.
Yeah.
And then to answer the latter part of your question, at the moment, nothing to say about whether we have anything on the plate with Suda at the moment, but hopefully in the future. Since speaking from a personal role, I'm usually his translator when he comes out. I love the guy. I would love to do something with him again.
Do you have any interesting stories about the time you spent with Suda 51 while you were both here in Europe?
So there was one night when we were out, and he wanted to film some kind of like promo videos, like message to fan type things.
Yeah.
And so we stopped into a pub, and we ordered 2 Guinnesses, and we filmed the video because he wanted to have Guinness in the shot, right? Like, look, we're in England, we're doing this cool thing. It's that. So he does his part, he drinks, sets it down, then he goes, let's go. And I'm like, okay. And then he's like, whoa. And he like points to my pint, and he's like, drink up. So if you've never chugged a Guinness, don't. Guinness, as delicious as it is, it's a pretty difficult beer to chug.
We still get a lot of people asking about the silver case games in our online store. Do you feel visual novels, especially the more unnerving ones, tend to have a longer lifespan than other game genres?
I don't necessarily know that visual novels have a longer lifespan per se. I think in a way they might, simply because, when you have less moving parts, as it were, it's a lot... It holds up better, right? Like when you're looking at games from my era of gaming in terms of PlayStation 1, it's like, oh God, these are ugly, right? Like big blocky monsters kind of like moving around and everything like that. Whereas a visual novel, since it's, at heart, pictures and text, they lend themselves to kind of, remaining very viable over a long period of time. That said, I feel like most good games, no matter what they are, they always kind of have that long tail.
Yeah.
So for visual novels in particular, people do find out about them later and try to go back. But that's, in a way, that's no different from a lot of other games out there. So visual novel fans, I think they're growing, which might be why it seems like also there's a lot bigger demand. It was never really a genre which took off in the West. I think the closest thing we ever had would be the adventure games, like... yeah, exactly. Like the LucasArts games and things like that. And that genre kind of just completely fell off the face of the earth at the end of the mid-90s, the late 90s. So visual novels in a way are almost, even though they were, those two styles of games kind of developed separately but concurrently, visual novels never left. And so I think for a lot of gamers who maybe don't really like that Twitch aspect of a lot of gaming, just the fact that you can have this interactive experience and not necessarily be a good gamer, I think is really appealing. And many, many people nowadays are finding out about that. So I feel like, visual novels probably seem like they have like a real big appeal to a certain sub-segment of gamers.
From what I've heard, the 25th Ward was originally a flip phone game in Japan. Do you think there are any other hidden gems that could be ported from phones to consoles?
Phone games? Gosh, I can't, I don't know. This for us, this was pretty like, whoa, okay, cool. But in terms of old games that, need to be revived, there's definitely a lot of hidden gems. And there's one coming out next year, which you'll hear about very soon, that we're bringing out to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next up is the Penny Punching Princess, which is a beat-em-up action game that released on the Switch and Vita last year. Since we're starting to see a few more beat-em-up action games from Nipponichi, is this a genre that they're trying to be more involved in? And is there a direct lineage from Penny Punching Princess to the Princess Guide? Do they run on the same engine, for example?
The latter half of your question is a lot easier to answer, and the answer is yes. It seems that they're using the same engine. A lot of the core gameplay elements are the same between Penny Punching Princess and Princess Guide. As to whether or not the head office, suddenly this is now a new mandate to create beat-em-up action games, I'm not really sure. One thing I can say about our head office, though, is that, and this is just kind of from the outside looking in, since I'm not there day to day, but it seems like the developers have a lot of latitude to make what they want to make. So I feel like a lot of times if a director comes up and says, "Hey, this is a game I believe in, I want to make it. I know we're not made huge on beat-em-ups, but it's a beat-em-up." I think, provided that person can sell it, I feel like our head office is very willing to be like, yeah, go for it. I don't know if this myth actually exists, but if it does, to dispel it, not everybody at the head office is a super hardcore Disgaea strategy RPG fan, There's fans of all types of genres in the office, and that's on both sides of the ocean.
Okay. Penny Punching Princess features Nipponichi's trademark satirical humor. How does that manifest itself through the company's various offices?
Good question. So for that in particular, actually that game was written by Mr. Nikawa, and the Beetle Butler in that game has a really strong Osaka accent, which Osaka accents in Japan are usually associated with comedy, and the Osaka region in general is considered to be very, very money-minded. Maybe not in the nicest sense of that word. I don't know if there's an analog here in the UK, but that's kind of the feeling for Japanese people. Mr. Nikawa, though, however, because he writes really, and he's always been on the record of saying, I write for the Japanese audience. Yeah. But what he does say is that, but I'm funny, and my games are interesting. So whatever you do, when you take them to somewhere else, make sure you at least make them interesting. Yeah. Exactly. And so, given that, we've worked on games that he's written, or games that our head office has worked on for years now, we kind of know what hits and what misses with the fan base and what really works with the game. That said, we don't try to change, the game wholesale, but we do take some liberties when it comes to some jokes that just don't translate from one language to another.
Is that sense of humor something that flows through the company itself?
In a way, I think it does. I think that a certain type of person likes to work at NIS America, and a certain type of person definitely fits. And most people in the office, I'd say, have a really good sense of humor. Whether that lines up exactly with Disgaea style humor or anything, I'm not sure. Yeah. But people are pretty easygoing, so.
The limited edition for Penny Punching Princess is still very sought after. How did the gold bar idea come about? Actually,
if memory serves, Japan did a promotional item that was like tissue in a giant gold bar, and we get samples of limited editions from our head office or from partners as well. And we saw that and we thought, this is really, really cool. We didn't do tissue, obviously, but we thought it'd be a cool thing to incorporate, and so we did.
Okay, let's talk about Fallen Legions.
Ooh.
It's a game from the Western indie developer Yummy Yummy Tummy, who made a turn-based side-scrolling RPG with a style that could be seen as very Japanese. Was working with them any different from working with a Japanese developer?
God.
Oh boy.
No. This is a oh god of relief. Oh. Not to slag off Japanese developers at all, but I mean, for one thing, right? Yummy Yummy Tummy is located in California, where we are, so there's no time lag. So there's no worries about people missing emails because we're not in the office. The language barrier. Now, obviously, we have staff at NIS America who is completely bilingual, natively bilingual. So there's not an issue there, but sometimes getting the other staff on board with some very, very Japanese concepts, or vice versa, can be a little bit of a struggle. And because this is a Western developer, there's really none of that there. Furthermore, we've actually known that developer through other means for many years now. And so since we already had a good working relationship with that developer and that person, things flowed very, very smoothly as well. Yeah. So it was a really, really positive project for us. And I think we're really, really glad that we did it.
Are we likely to see more games from Yummy Yummy Tummy?
Gosh, I can't speak for the developer themselves. 99% sure they are working on something else. Whether or not we'll do it, I mean, that remains to be seen. But I'm sure that should the opportunity present itself, we would love to work on it. And that's not just with them as well. Foreign developers, American developers as well. We're not limited to Japan. Obviously, we do love to bring out, part of our stated mission is to bring Japanese content out, to the West. But if there's something in our wheelhouse that we think that, our fans would like, we'll definitely look far and wide for that.
Next up is The Lost Child from Kadokawa Games. NIS America's released Metal Max, Demon Gaze, and God Wars, making Kadokawa Games one of their most prolific partners. What can you tell us about this company and why might people want to explore its games?
So Kadokawa is a big publishing house, originally starting with books. Their empire grew to include film and magazines and video games, and I think there's some kind of music or voice acting thing involved too. They are huge. Yeah. Visiting their offices in Japan, it's in a really nice part of Japan actually. It's Fujimicho, which is really close to a station called Yotsuya, which is right on the banks of the old castle moat. So it's in a really pretty area. And they have 3 corporate buildings in this place. They're huge. Working with them has been really cool. Games being kind of the newer part of their overall business, we kind of grew together in certain ways. Demon Gaze was the first project that we worked with on them, that worked with them on, and they, it was one of those things where I don't even know if they had the foreign market in the cards for that, but we thought the game was great. We reached out, and that opened up the relationship with them. And all of their titles are really quirky and unique, and it's definitely something that they share DNA-wise with NIS, Nipponichi Software Japan. So working with them has been very natural, and it's been really fun to bring out all of their games, since all of them are so distinct. No 2 of their games are really alike.
Yeah. From what I understand, El Shaddai was based on the Book of Enoch, and just like El Shaddai, The Lost Child features a lot of Christian and Jewish symbolism. How are these themes perceived in Japan? Is it similar to how games like Okami or God Wars are perceived in the West?
I have no clue whatsoever. That's a fantastic question, but not being Japanese and not having, been there for the launch of this game, I can't say.
Yeah.
What I do know, just from living there as long as I did, Judeo-Christian myth is definitely foreign in this, like you said, in the same way that their kami or Shinto or things like that are to us. They can definitely play around with it a lot more than maybe we can. And what I mean by that is that obviously there's still a lot of really devout believers in Abrahamic religions on our side of the world, and so you can't really go too far off base without getting some people very, very angry about it. Whereas in Japan, since they don't have that baggage with it, I think that they can do a lot more with the symbology. A great example would be like Neon Genesis Evangelion, right? There's a lot of Judeo-Christian stuff in there, but it's really unique. It's not. I don't think a Western mind could necessarily come up with that, right?
The Xeno Saga game.
Yeah, exactly. All the Xeno games are like that too, which is super, super cool. And sometimes, if you've grown up in one of these religious traditions, sometimes it can be like, oh my God, where did you get that? That makes no sense. But the flip side too, again, is that sometimes you get these takes on it that are like, oh, wow, I never would have thought of that. That's super cool. So for the Japanese people, I think that they have a lot of fun with it. And And incidentally too, not only like you said, El Shaddai, obviously, El Shaddai is a Hebrew word. That's one of the names of God. But The Lost Child itself, in addition to kind of having that layer of Judeo-Christian mythology to it, also has Cthulhu in it as well. So H.P. Lovecraft stuff. So, they threw everything at the kitchen sink in that game.
Now it's time to talk about Falcom and Ys 8, which was a huge hit on the PlayStation 4 and Vita, but last year it was released on the Switch, and if anything, that made the title even more popular. Do you think the success of the game on the Switch is partly due to the fan bases of games like Zelda and their need for more AAA action RPGs?
Yeah, I think that definitely ties into it. There's a myth, I think, throughout, even at the very beginning of Switch's library, that it was always been kind of sparse. I don't think that's the case. But when you have that perception, you have people talking about it, sometimes your mind starts to think, well, maybe it is. And because maybe people were saying like, oh, there isn't a lot of RPGs yet for the Switch, or there might have been people like, okay, I just want to play something, and so that's that. But there's also the case where we got a lot of positive comparisons to stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and even Zelda and things like that. So definitely, getting nods from giants of RPGs like that to have people check out Ys, I think definitely helped the game. That said, I think the game stands toe-to-toe with anything that Nintendo's put out. Or, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is from Monolith Soft, but it was published by Nintendo. So not to put those games down at all, but on the other hand, to say that Ys is of that caliber too. I mean, that series is from the 1980s, and they've been, refining their development craft over these years. And Ys is really every time an Ys releases, it feels like it's a culmination of all those years of experience to like perfect the action RPG.
Yeah. It feels like the number of people interested in Falcom games increases each time a game is released. Do you believe there's a lot more room for them to grow?
Yeah, I mean, we have not reached critical mass yet by any stretch. It's hard for me to talk in a way about Falcom because I'm such a huge personal fan, but I think everybody in the company believes that Falcom is the most underrated, maybe underrepresented JRPG developer out there. I mean, you've got behemoths like Square and Atlas and Square Enix, and they make fantastic games, obviously, that are, throughout the years have been pillars of the JRPG experience. But equally, Falcom has been there too, maybe even before in certain cases. The only problem that Falcom's faced is that they haven't had consistent distribution in the West, and that's where we like to think that we come in. Is to consistently bring these games out to people, so that Falcom can shine. I mean, you'll notice that we always put Falcom's name on the package of these games because we want people to pick it up and to be able to associate not just Falcom with the Trail series or the East series, but we want them to associate Falcom with good games. And so, in the future, we want to continue to work with them as much as we possibly can to bring out their games.
Before the Switch version release, I think people perceived Ys as a PC and PlayStation franchise. Does the Ys series have a long history with Nintendo that paid off here?
The Ys history and the Falcom history in general, although it's not quite my place to say, has a very interesting history with Nintendo platforms. Basically speaking, Falcom, up until, within the last 7 to 10 years, has been pretty much a PC-focused developer. If you look at their history, they started on PC, and up until very recently, the games generally got a PC first release, if not a PC only release. Throughout the years, various companies would approach Falcom asking for licensing, and they would get licenses to those games, and then that's why you have games like Ys on Mega Drive, or PC Engine, or there was a Super Nintendo version for 5. And so Falcom's always been very open to working with other people if they'd like to bring a game out to a Nintendo platform, or any platform for that matter. But and they've said so themselves on several occasions that given the fact that their team is very small and they like to keep it that way, they like to focus their development on one particular platform. And then if something else comes, that's cool, but they're going to focus on their own. Yeah. So, kind of a roundabout answer to your question. It's not direct, but I think it gets the point across.
Okay, the letter opener in a limited edition was great. So how did that idea come about?
One day, we were sitting in the office. We got a piece of mail. No one could open it, and we thought, God, it'd be really cool if we... I don't know, actually. No, but where it came from is that, there's a sword in Ys VIII that Adel gets towards the end of the game. That's really cool. And so we thought, we're obviously not going to be able to make a full-size replica of this, but we want to do something cool with it. People still get mail, right? Why don't we do a letter opener? So that's where that came from.
So NIS America has been working together with Falcom in Europe for a while now. How has all the experience gained while working on their previous titles helped with the localization of Trails of Cold Steel 3?
Very, very well. Particularly because we have a really good direct line with them. We can contact them about anything. And we also know how their file structure works too. This is kind of getting into the how sausage is made aspect of localization. But every company essentially handles their localization files differently. More often than not, they're going to be in an Excel format, Microsoft Excel. But how they're arranged within that is anybody's guess. Some companies like to put the entire script on one tab of an Excel file, and then you just go to town. Other companies like to put little snippets of the game throughout hundreds of tabs. Some people like to do per system, per file. So for example, you'd have the story in one file, you'd have system text in another. And learning how companies structure their files is in and of itself something the localization task has to do every time, and it's a difficult task. And so the fact that we've worked on several of their games now, we get how their file structure works, and so it's a lot easier to navigate within it. And then because we've worked with them before too, sometimes for a lot of the times when we work on games, 9 times out of 10, we're working on a finished product, which means sometimes the development team is actually finished with the game in Japan. And sometimes we don't know how far we can ask for them to do certain things for us in regards to that. And when you're in a new relationship, you kind of don't want to push the line. And so you have a tendency to say, like, I wish we could get this, but maybe we shouldn't ask. Now that we've worked with them several times, we kind of are very comfortable with them. So we're able to talk to them a lot more freely and openly to say, hey, guys, we don't know if this is possible or not, but could you give us X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
And more often than not, they do. So it's really, really been a huge help working on Trails of Cold Steel 3, because that is such a huge game, text-wise, over 2.4 million Japanese characters. And every little bit of help from any side helps.
So now we're going to talk about God Wars. It was announced that the series achieved over 200,000 sales for Kadokawa Games, and that they're starting on a sequel. On our online store, we sold out of the limited editions as well, but it felt like it was a bit of a slow build at first. But this series is starting to find a nice niche for itself. Do you think its success is down to the Japanese folklore setting in a strategy RPG? I guess something like what Akami did in the action RPG genre.
Absolutely. So the person who made this game is actually the president of Kadokawa. He is from a region of Japan that is actually kind of the focal point of Japanese mythology. And he constantly wondered, A, where did this folklore come from? And B, what about the origins of the Japanese people in general, Because Japanese mythology is unique to Japan. Whereas something like, Odin or something like that. That's a shared mythology with Scandinavia and Germany and things like that, right? Whereas Japanese is very unique. And so he studied a lot about Japanese history and Japanese mythology. And so he thought, what if I wrote a story that talked about what if the gods were real? And what if I wrote a story that explained how they came to be and how we as Japanese people came to be? And that's kind of where God Wars came from. And so it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. But when you have someone so dedicated in what they're doing, it really shines through on the final project. And obviously, Japan as a culture and a society has been fascinating, I think, to Western people for many, 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 many years now. I think that really resonated with people. To say nothing of the beautiful artwork in the game and the fact that it was a strategy RPG, which you don't see those as many of those as you did maybe back in the 90s or 2000s. So I think it was kind of a perfect storm in terms of uniqueness that really got that people really enjoyed.
Do you think games like Disgaea made people more interested in giving God Wars a try?
I think so. I know, for example, this is anecdotal from my own personal history. I grew up, the first SRPG I ever played was Vandal Hearts, which no one's probably ever heard of.
I've heard of that.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, awesome. But the one that I think really turned me on to the genre itself was Final Fantasy Tactics. Most people would say that.
Yeah.
Now, I had a friend in college, right when Disgaea 1 dropped, that he had never really played SRPGs. They weren't really his thing. But he played Disgaea, and he's like, this is awesome, And so I think pretty much for any genre, there's always that one game that turns you on to it, even if you weren't interested in it before. And I think for a lot of people it was Disgaea. So I don't know how much of a direct correlation there is to people purchasing God Wars and being interested in SRPGs and Disgaea, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who played God Wars and enjoyed it were maybe turned on to the genre because of Disgaea so many years ago.
Now it's time for a few more of the Nipponichi software games, starting with Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk. When we had a chance to meet Nikawa-san, who's the Nipponichi president, he told us that they wanted to shake up the dungeon crawler genre with this game in the same way that Disgaea did it for strategy RPGs. They definitely did do this and made one of the most unique dungeon crawlers of all time in the process. I'm sure this must have been a satisfying project for all involved. What are your memories of working on this game?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As usual, I can't speak to the head office.
Yeah.
I know that it was a lot of work on their side. I know that anytime you approach something that you've never really done before, there's kind of trepidation. It's like, is this going to work? But it obviously paid off for them. For us, our memories of this game go way back to when it was essentially just a Vita game. And for us, the writing was already on the wall for the PlayStation Vita. Like, oh boy, guys, this is as cool as this game looks. Can you think about something else for it? So obviously, they kind of reworked it, and we got later versions, what it came out for PlayStation 4 and for the Switch, and they actually added a little bit more to it there. So we went from initially a game that looked really cool that we would have loved to do that maybe wouldn't have come out if the head office hadn't agreed to work on these versions, to something that, okay, this is now on the cards. But the next challenge for us was all right, how do we market this game? How do we get this game out to people? Obviously, we've worked with games in that genre before, so we're familiar with it. But it's like every game has its own core that needs to shine, and we need to polish it so that everybody can see that shine. And so we saw, the things that made this game really unique. For one thing, a direct appeal for fans of Nipponichi software in general is that you've got Harada-san's artwork, and then you've got Mr. Sato's music. So that's instantly, you've got people who are interested in Disgaea. Their ears are pricked up and they're like, what's this? On the other hand, you've also got your dungeon RPG fans, right? But it's like, no. This isn't just a dungeon RPG. This is going to change everything. So whereas before playing dungeon RPGs, you're kind of forced into corridors and you turn left and you turn right. This game says, hey, what if you could just break down the wall and go wherever you want? And, that really changes everything in terms of game design, because you can bypass a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. And there's obviously risk and reward there too. If you break a wall and there's a really high level monster there, right? You can get completely crushed. In addition to that, you also have the squad system too. Usually when you're playing a game like this, it's like, okay, make your party of 6. Don't forget your cleric. You know what I mean? And that's it. Whereas with this, you can actually... They went above and beyond just having multiple characters. You could arrange each and every single squad within your team to have its own type of formation with its own characters and its class. And it just added so much to the strategy. It's such a Disgaea way of doing things in a way, but by the same token, it's so unique. And I think that even though there was a lot going on there, it never really felt super overwhelming once you started playing. Obviously, talking about it and looking at it, it's like, wow, that sounds like a lot of stuff. I don't know if I can handle that. But the game does such a good job of getting you into it and kind of allowing you to go at your own pace with it and going as deep as you want to go. It was just really brilliant. And so for us working on it at the office, learning about it was really, really fun too, because we kind of too had the same learning curve. And I know the folks who worked on it in the localization team, they really got deeply involved in it. The person who was the main editor on the game, I know he researched really, really deeply into it. And he also worked really hard for the voice recording, because as a company, we always go to the voice recording sessions to actually assist in directing the voice talent. And I know he and the girl who worked on the translation, they put a lot of effort into it too. And so obviously, it was a game that meant a lot to us as a company because it's from our head office. It did really well in Japan. We had to kind of meet that expectation. But you're always a little bit worried when a game releases. And the fact that when it came out, everything that we knew to be true, this is a great game, it should sell well, it's interesting, it's unique, the fans said the exact same thing. And so it was very, very gratifying.
Were the development team expecting the game to take a bit of time to catch on in the West because of its depth?
I can't really answer because not having a hotline to the dev team. All I know is that the feedback that they got immediate feedback in Japan, which they could read themselves. And we try to be diligent about giving feedback to our head office of Western feedback as well. And so I believe that we've told them what Western fans have thought. And so hopefully that feedback's been made available to them and that they're able to see that and incorporate it. But as far as I know, I think they're really pleased with how the game performed over here in the West.
It does seem like the game was well received since 150,000 sales were announced. Is that incentive enough to look at more games in the series? The Labyrinth of Refrain Muso, maybe? Labyrinth of Refrain? I
think I can pretty confidently say no to the Muso part, but as to sequels or things like that, we'll just have to wait and see. Okay. I think they definitely have been paying attention not only to sales numbers, but also to fan reactions. So.
All right, so we've mentioned Disgaea a few times already, but now it's time to actually talk about Disgaea 1 Complete. This is probably the best received limited edition our European store has ever seen. Can you walk us through the process behind its creation?
So when it comes to this, we had a huge mandate. And what I mean by that is that Disgaea 1 is still the most popular game in that series. Also, to be perfectly frank, in the office, no one actually worked on the original one because it was done by Atlas and then it was done by a different company out here in Europe.
Okay.
So we kind of had to live up to somebody else's work. Now, there's been different versions of that game that have come out over the years, and we've obviously done on that. But given that this was a chance to bring out Disgaea 1 to a new generation, we know we had our work cut out for us. And so all of our LEs, we take a lot of time internally to really get to the heart of the game and to put the kind of content that we think people would like into the LE. As we kind of talked about in a different conversation earlier, art book and soundtrack is something that everybody asks for. And this is something we know because we've directly collected data at events with fans. Like, what do you want in an LE? And they're like, art book and soundtrack. So that's kind of a given, right? We knew that. But what about the other things that we added to it? We just really, the good news is that I would say a lot of the people who have joined our company have played Disgaea 1. And so they actually really know the game really well. And they know what fits in the context of what would be a good item. Perfect example is the Etna Nopai mousepad. Everybody who's played Disgaea knows that that's kind of a sore spot for Etna. She hates it. It always pisses her off. And the fact that we're able to call that out in a mousepad, especially when nowadays there are those mousepads that do have that kind of stuff, and we could do that, was amazing. And everybody who got it online, they lost it. They thought it was hysterical. Also, obviously, all Prinnies have that box. And so recently, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've tried to make our boxes more interesting too. So obviously, we have ones that are just kind of like a pretty gloss print. But then starting with, maybe ETH 8 or maybe even before, we've tried to do a little bit more with the box, just to make the box in and of itself a really cool item. And since Prinny has that pack that they carry on them, we thought that would be a really cool thing too. So for the staff working on, anytime you work on a Disgaea, it's always fun. Yeah. But working on Disgaea 1 and then being able to add some really cool new physical content to it, I think everybody really, really enjoyed. And so overall, we actually saw really a positive reception in North America too to it. I think we did a pretty good job with that one.
It does seem like with the introduction of the Switch games, the series has become more popular and relevant than ever. What do you reckon is behind this resurgence, given the classic formula remains unchanged? The popularity does seem to wax and wane.
I think Nikawa-san actually kind of touched on this when he came out here. It's that, I guess from the story perspective, he writes for Japan. He's not trying to make concessions for any people out there in the world. And he, like we talked about earlier, he leaves the localization up to us. And so there's no thought about, what's going to sell? There's no cynical approach to what kind of weird hooks can I put in here to get people interested. It's like, this is a game for otaku, by otaku. We hope you like it, And so I think that's one draw. And the second draw too is that, like you said, with the mechanics. So the mechanics remain unchanged, but they're always iterated upon. And it always more and more get added. And for some people, I know, it can be like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. But most people really, really like it, especially fans of the series. To add to that, you especially see for games like Disgaea D2 and then Disgaea 5, there's been a lot added to the games that kind of lower the frustration too. Even though a lot of Disgaea is grinding, and I think Disgaea is pretty confident in saying there's a lot of grinding, there's been a lot to make the grind more enjoyable too. So even though the games are, like you said, fundamentally unchanged, at the very, very core, a lot's been added to them to allow you to do more as the player and to make your experience a lot more smooth and streamlined too. So waxing and waning popularity, I think that any franchise goes through that, to be honest with you. I don't think it's just limited to Disgaea. I think that we definitely got a surge of new blood with the Switch. Historically, Disgaea has been a PlayStation series, right? But because it was able to come out on Switch at an early time in the Switch's life cycle, there's been so many people who had never even heard of the series before who picked it up. And now we have tons of new fans who are just waiting for new content. So I would say that going forward, we maybe had that period of waning for a little bit, but I think it's going to start waxing again and get bigger and bigger.
Do you have any other plans to keep the series going while we wait for news on the next numbered sequel?
That is an awesome question. We understand that it's really important to keep the audience hot when it comes to a franchise that people are really keen on. Particularly when you have a game like Disgaea 5 that was such a success, that means fans want more right away, actually. And so we are very, very aware that fans do want more. And so we've been working with our head office to make sure that content comes out consistently within the Disgaea universe. Now, I'm not saying that this is Disgaea 6 or this is this, that, or the other, but we do know that it's important, and we are making sure that fans get their Disgaea fix without having to wait too long between things. And we've taken that to our head office, and I think they understood. But we let them know exactly that. Like, this is a hot property. We need to keep our fans warm and hot. And so they understood. They're on the same page. So definitely pay attention over the next few months, and you'll hear more and more about what we have in store for the series.
So that was actually a really good conversation. Would you say that NIS America had a very good year last year?
Yeah, I think it was a very good year. I think, the measure of a good year is your fan reaction.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, from a business perspective, sales are very important. But at the same time, it's did we succeed in making our fans happy? And I think that even though we had a rocky start coming off the end of 2017, I think from the very beginning of 2018, we worked really hard to regain a lot of trust that maybe we had lost in a certain situation, but also just to consistently bring out high quality games. I think over the last few years too, I think we've always tried to bring out the best games that we could from Japan, but I think these last few years we have really, really worked harder and harder to make sure we're bringing out really awesome games that are all unique and fun and exciting and all offer something a little bit different, even though they might, on surface appear a little bit similar. And so I think overall we've succeeded in that. I'm no stranger to the internet. I read what people say. Yeah. We all do in the office. And we understand that there's a lot of people out there who have their grievances with us. And so I think to those people I would like to say too is that actually you matter to us as well. We have our fans. People are always more willing to be vocal when they want to complain rather than they want to praise. And honestly, we do sometimes get mails of praise too, like, hey, I just want to say you guys are doing a great job. Those mean a lot, and those are awesome. But we also do see quite a bit of, hey, you screwed this up, right? And that's actually really important to us too, because it gives us a directive for where we can improve. And it also allows us to, hopefully, when we do improve, be able to show people, look, we listen to you. Because the last thing people want to do is feel like they're not being listened to. Because so many of us are fans ourselves, we get it. Yeah. We really do. As a kid, I can't tell you how many times I played a game, and God, if I could have given those companies, a piece of my mind, I definitely would have. And so, even though we're not able to answer some things immediately or give people the answers that they want to hear, again, we are listening. And we appreciate all kinds of feedback. And so I know that's kind of getting off what the answer or what your question was. But yeah, I think 2018 was successful. Can we do better? Yeah, and we will. And I think 2019, as you're about to see in a few weeks, get ready for a really cool 2019 because we have a lot in store.
Well, I was about to ask you if you had a message for the fans out there, but you pretty much covered everything. But yeah, thanks again for joining us to talk about the past year, Alan. And for those of you that are watching or listening, thanks for tuning in too. This was the Prinny Podcast Episode 1, a conversation with Alan Costa. If you want to stay up to date with everything we're doing, then make sure you follow us on our various social media channels, at NISA Europe on Facebook and at NISA in Europe on both Instagram and Twitter. And for those of you that want to talk to NIS America or stay up to date with what they're doing, head over to NIS America on Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, and NIS America Inc. on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in the next Prinny Podcast.